Throughout history, the African American race has struggled to reach equality to the white race, which constitutes the majority of society. From the Supreme Court denying black citizenship in 1857 to the Black Codes of 1865 that began the practice of segregation in public schools, there is no question that there was extreme prejudice against the African Americans. The 14th Amendment was created in hopes of alleviating some of the inconsistencies between races. However, it was not successful. Jim Crow laws began to be practiced in the South, and segregation in schools was justified based on the Plessy v. Ferguson separate but equal clauses, as well as the claim that it was a federal law decision. In 1909, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP, was formed. Its major mission was to take action against segregation. It devoted enormous amounts of its efforts solely to attacking segregation in schools. The NAACP became a primary contributor to the focus of this documentary, which is the Brown v. Board of Education case.
The NAACP, under Thurgood Marshall, the head of the NAACP Education Fund, wanted to hit the courts at their weakest point, which was education. What is referred to as the Brown v. Board of Education consisted of 5 cases that occurred in 1950 to 1953. Each of them had different facts and conditions, but all of them had the same root issue. The first was the Belton/Bula v. Gebhardt. This case involved 2 families. The Belton family was frustrated that their African-American children were forced to go to a run-down segregated high school instead of the one in the community that had better conditions and higher quality education.
The second family, the Bulas, were upset that a white school bus passed their house every day and would not pick up their daughter. Both families were represented by Lewis Redding, a local lawyer who was also a member of the NAACP. The case went to the Delaware court rather than the U.S. District Court. The chancellor ordered that the children involved in the case were to be admitted into the white school immediately. This was the only case out of the 5 that achieved their goal. However, the Delaware segregation law still existed.
The second case was Bowling v. Sharp. A man named Gardner Bishop and a group of parents wanted to end segregation in schools of Washington, D.C. They wanted to get 11 African American students to be admitted into a newly built junior high school, but they were denied again on the grounds of race, even though there were several empty classrooms. James Nabbit Jr. partnered with the NAACP to take on the case. The U.S. Supreme Court denied the request, saying that the 14th Amendment was not applicable in the District of Columbia.
The third case was the Brown v. Board of Education case. 13 parents that were members of the NAACP chapter in Topeka, Kansas, took their African American children to school in their neighborhood to try to enroll them in the upcoming school year. Oliver Brown was one of these parents. His daughter, as well as the rest of the children, were denied admission and forced to attend schools in the city for blacks, which forced the families to travel long distances to receive a subpar education. Again, local lawyers partnering with the NAACP took on the case, but nothing came out of it. The only thing that the Supreme Court did agree on was that segregation had immense psychological impacts on black students.
The fourth was Briggs v. Elliott. Harry Briggs, one of the 20 parents, brought a suit against R.W. Elliott, the president of a school board in South Carolina. At first, the parents only asked that the country would provide school buses for black students, but then faced segregation itself. However, once again, even with the help of the NAACP, the requests were denied.
The fifth and final case that made up Brown v. Board was Davis v. County School Board. 450 African American students from a high school in Virginia organized a protest with the aid of the NAACP to end the horrible conditions at the black high schools compared to the white schools. The NAACP filed the case to the U.S. District Court, and by no surprise, the requests were denied once again.
Finally, all 5 cases were encompassed into Brown v. Board of Education, and the cases as a whole were evaluated, re-argued, and the decision was finally reached in 1954. The cases went to the United States Supreme Court, and Chief Justice Warren were delivered ruling on May 17th. The court's unanimous decision overturned provisions of the 1896 Plessy v. Ferguson decision, which had allowed for, quote, separate but equal, end quote, facilities, including public schools in the United States. Declaring that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal, the Brown v. Board decision helped break the back of state-sponsored segregation. Warren ordered that segregation in public education denies the equal protection of the laws, and any state that disagrees with the ruling needs to provide further evidence.
Weeks after school started, it still wasn't safe for the children to enter the building. It took the brave efforts of a few teachers, parents, students, and finally, intervention from the president to control the angry resistance. Eisenhower sent 1,000 paratroopers to join 10,000 members of the Arkansas National Guard who were required to provide protection. As the rest of the nation watched television reports from the security of their living rooms, 9 courageous young people confronted generations of resistance to change.
If resistance to the federal court order ceases at once, the further presence of federal troops will be unnecessary. The city of Little Rock will return to its normal habits of peace and order, and a blot upon the fair name and high honor of our nation in the world will be removed. Thus will be restored the image of America and of all its parts as one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The impact of Brown versus Board was great since it was a spark to the American civil rights movement and ended legal segregation of schools. It also brought immense amounts of attention to the issue of segregation in public schools, as well as education equality as a whole. However, the issue of education equality is not gone. The Brown versus Board can be seen as the tip of the iceberg because it is unfinished considering the amount of inequality that exists in education today.
It is clear that in today's society there is still not equal access to education. Just last Wednesday, March 22, 2017, the U.S. Supreme Court announced that it is working on a ruling that would increase the rights of millions of learning disabled students throughout the country. It would require special education programs in public schools to meet higher standards. This ruling comes about due to the fact that the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, passed in 1975, is not being completely adhered to. This act required that students with disabilities must receive free, appropriate public education, administered in the least restrictive way. However, a teen from Colorado with a learning disability was not doing so well in public school, but when put into a private school, he thrived. Advocates for passing this new ruling say that this teen shows how special needs students can succeed if given the proper resources. The case of this teen also shows how even today there is still not equal access to quality education.
It's not a secret that in recent years, education equality for all students has increased. However, with Betsy DeVos being brought into office as the Secretary of Education, many are starting to worry if their rights and access to equal education will be threatened. According to an article from the Huffington Post written on March 16, 2017, DeVos poses a serious threat to those students who are part of the LGBTQ+ community. Not only is DeVos personally against the community, her and her family have donated thousands of dollars to limit gay people's rights. This is alarming to the parents of the community and the students themselves because feeling safe and protected at school is vital. During Barack Obama's presidency, the rising suicide rate of lesbian, gay, transgender, and bisexual students was acknowledged and several programs were put in place to actively work against it. However, a lot of these programs are still a work in progress, and with DeVos making decisions, tensions across the nation are rising.
More education inequality can be found in today's society through Chicago's public schools. On March 14, 2017, Kelly Blair wrote about how all of the Chicago public schools are suing Illinois for alleged violations of the Illinois Civil Rights Act. Their case claims that Black and Latino students make up about 20% of Illinois' public school population, yet only receive 15% of the money the state appropriates for education. Here's an example Blair used. Over the past 6 years, the Chicago Public Schools have spent $320 million on new school construction and plan to spend another $330 million. But 73% of that money went to or is earmarked for schools where white students make up more than a quarter of the student body. This evidence shows that even though the desegregation situation is still much better than before in the 1954's Brown versus Board of Education, there continues to be a segregation issue in America's society today.